outside, no man is safe from. You could run, but you can't hide forever from these streets that we done took. You walking with your head down, scared to look.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode, a special episode of Business and Biceps, episode 25, and it's Monday, and you better wake your ass up, because on today's show, we have a special guest that's one of the monstrous entrepreneur, self-help, self-motivated, crazy human experiment maniacs that has ever lived. And he's got over 100 million downloads on his podcast. Unbelievable, unbelievable. You guys, I got to tell you, out the gate, you got to make sure, and John will tell you this too, you better get your pen and paper out because there's so much knowledge that's going to be hit. But this is a different kind of podcast. You know, it's brought to you by still maxeduppermuscle.com and Reebok. But it's not just me and John today because we got Tim Ferris on. Right, Johnny Fosco?
Hey, man, not only do we have Tim Ferris on, but Tim comes hard. This guy is like a human computer. Cory, the thing that struck me about Tim that was so interesting was that his brain, literally, every word he says, he sources like when we would do high school projects, right? We'd have to source our information. This guy sources his words and his thoughts. He is the human embodiment of a computer. And when you listen to this interview, he even talks about it like no more input, Control, Alt, Delete. Like part of him is a computer. And I believe because of that, he's been able to write books that have sold, 10 million copies, Cory? I mean, his approach to life is he is a human guinea pig, and he's going to test everything and find the optimal way to deliver results.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. So I think the 4-Hour Work Week released, I want to say like 8 years ago, and roughly, might have been 10. And that was his first big best-selling book that was like pretty much like the first guy that I read about that essentially so-called life hacked, like the internet, where he was making money and traveling the world and had everything outsourced. And it was like almost like he was a project. And he's also been known to do a lot of physical stuff and you know, cutting weight, gaining weight, performance, and really detailing it out. So I was always kind of drawn to Tim. His other book called The 4-Hour Body was super cool too, very my style for performance. And then he had The 4-Hour Chef, which I hadn't read that one. And this one he talks about, it's called Tools of Titans, where he just has interviewed and got so much information from billionaires and some just amazing people. And so I couldn't wait to talk to him about it. And really, he's on my top list of podcasters and authors. And so, man, I met him once at Arnold's place, but this was unique. And I'll be honest with you, John, like he was on the list of guys I wanted to have on our show with Eric Thomas, him, and eventually Arnold too, which, you know, obviously interviewed Arnold in the past, but there's a couple hit listers, and so I feel like we got to check one off. Which cool.
Here to me is the real honor in it is the day before we did this interview, he was on the Today Show. We are part of his press schedule. His people chose Business and Biceps to launch a book campaign that is probably the most highly anticipated book coming into Barnes & Noble in the month of December. So this is big stuff. And the fact that Business and Biceps was part of the press tour, man, credit goes to our listeners again, man. You guys rock. I mean, we're crushing it.
Well, and I'll tell you guys, there was, you know, John and I got the book early. There was no doubt takeaways all over the place that you'll hear us talk about with Tim. And also, I found a QL activator from Donnie Thompson, which is part of my injury I had in my kind of like in my hip. There was just applicable stuff all over the place. And I'm not even a quarter of the way through the book. I mean, I thumbed through it, just really unique. And we want to support Tim, guys, because I believe he'll turn around and support us back. I mean, having him on Business and Biceps for the amount of time we had, which was like an hour, which is really hard to do on a press tour during a book that's going to be everywhere. So he gave us his time. He was very honest in this interview. We got some great stuff out of him. And so I absolutely would say you guys need to purchase the book and support Tim. And he's going. There's absolutely going to be things that'll help your just everyday life in there. I mean, I really believe so.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Cory. And here's the thing, guys. This guy is uber successful, right? He was an early investor in companies like Uber and Facebook. I mean, this guy is on the ball. But he talked about, in this interview you're right about to hear, he talked about how a guy with this kind of brain, with this kind of success, battled suicide and almost committed suicide. So you'll hear it in the interview, but it just goes to show you guys, if you're struggling with anything, we all struggle. And I think that was one of the great takeaways of what you're about to hear. So I'm excited for everyone to hear it. This guy talks and delivers so much information. So like Cory said, get your pen, get your paper, and let's go.
Yeah, this is one you're going to have to listen to a couple times. Like John and I have listened to it back a couple times. And honestly, he was so excited to share information with you guys. I could tell as soon as he got on the phone, he was ready to go. That John and I had to like butt in a few times, like to make sure we kept it on direction so we could really get you guys some just killer information. But Tim delivered. I can't tell you, like I look over at my bookshelf and all of his books are there. I mean, it was a real pleasure. And yeah, he's like a computer. I mean, that's it. You guys are about to hear that. I mean, John, what's I know the suicide thing was amazing, and then I got to tell a personal story of how I kind of battled Tim in a poker tournament at the end too. You guys, I think, will enjoy, and just overall, like it was so all over the place, but so many takeaways. Like I don't know if I can really say anything else except for I'm excited to get it rolling here.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the one thing I'll say in closing, guys. I did not know of Tim that well. I obviously researched him heavily and got on him heavily before we interviewed him. But he is, if you do not know who he is, like Cory said, he's got 100 million downloads, and he is one of the most successful podcasters in the world. But he is like the it author of our time. That's who Tim Ferris is. He's like the it author. So sit back, grab your notes, and dig in because this is going to be an experience.
Man, do we got a killer guest on today. We got best-selling author, top podcaster, over 100 million downloads, and what I like best, human experiment, Tim Ferris. What's up, my brother?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
So me and John, we're putting together some just killer questions for the listeners because we know there's a ton of takeaways, based around Tim's new book, Tools of Titans. And let me read this for you guys. It's the tactics and routines and habits of billionaires, icons, and world-class performers. And so if you guys can't learn anything from this book or what we're about to drop from Tim right now, man, I'm telling you, it's some great takeaways. Me and John were thumbing through this thing, and we are just pumped. So, John, I'll tell you what. Right off the gate, I think we got to talk about entrepreneurship before we get to the book because I really believe Tim was one of the leaders in this new level of entrepreneurs of the internet age, and so I think that's like a really, really good starting point, eh?
Yeah, without a doubt. Tim, as you're well aware, and you're one of the godfathers of it, entrepreneurship being magnified on social media, especially in today's society, is getting to a level that, for Christ's sake, the President of the United States, the President-elect, is a businessman with real estate roots. Do you think that the word entrepreneur and the understanding of entrepreneurship from today's youth is over-glorified because of what they see online and on social media?
Well, I think that there's definitely a romanticizing of entrepreneurship that is both good and bad. You see more and more startup founders, say, on the covers of magazines. You see also simultaneously on social media a lot of people who are big hat, no cattle, as we might say. There are a lot of talk, a lot of bluster, a lot of projected confidence, but if you were to look at their bank accounts and actual accomplishments, I don't think they would match up very well. And there are pluses and minuses to this. So the fact is that the barrier to entry for entrepreneurship and the costs for many of the aspects of building a company have dropped dramatically, whether that's tech-based. I live in Silicon Valley, and I've been involved with as an investor or advisor with a lot of fast-growing companies like Facebook and Uber and about 50 others. So that is a plus. You can prototype and you can test business ideas very, very cheaply. It's never been cheaper and easier to do. I think there are some perhaps unintended consequences of it being glorified, which I'm willing to accept. But many people who start companies these days, and I'll actually refer back to a question from Tools of Titan. So Brian Johnson started a company called Braintree. He first sold credit card processing door-to-door in Utah, later built this company Braintree and sold it for $800 million to eBay. And he's constantly sitting down for coffee with entrepreneurs, and they will pitch their idea, and he'll sense enthusiasm but not quite enough, and he'll ask them, is this an itch or is it a burn? And it has to be a burn, I think, for you to weather the storm and the inevitable obstacles that will take place. And it's also, I think, important to realize that certain things, we may get into this later, but for instance, in Silicon Valley, it's been very a few things have been fetishized that I think are misleading. So the first is the fetishizing of failure, where it's like fail quickly, fail forward, fail. And failure has almost been dressed up as a type of success. And I think this is a dangerous tendency, particularly in a country where everybody gets a gold trophy, which I don't think is long term very helpful at all.
No.
The reason being that if you look at some of the serial billionaires in Tools of Titans, for instance, like Mark Andreessen, so not only an incredible engineer, but an incredible investor and responsible, in effect, for any web browser that you're using today. If you're using a graphical web browser, it is influenced by Mark Andreessen, who was the co-author of Mosaic way back in the day. And I remember him saying, am I allowed to curse on the show? Is that, or should I stay away?
Yeah, hell yeah, please.
Okay, all right. So he says, all right. Yeah. So Mark said, I was asking him about some of these very popular words, pivot and failure, and he's like, when I was young, and I'm paraphrasing this, but like when I was coming up, we didn't have a fancy word for it. We just called it a fuck up. and then you have someone like Peter Thiel, also serial billionaire, very much in the news these days, and he was very, very emphatic when he says that failure is always a tragedy. It's not some type of learning imperative. It's not some kind of aesthetic imperative or educational imperative. It's always a tragedy because most things fail for more than one reason. They fail for like 5 reasons, and you'll think you failed for reason 2 when in fact you failed for reason 1. You'll try again, then you'll fail a second time. And so those are a few things that come to mind. Another example that we can touch upon, certainly now or later if you'd like, but you see a Zuckerberg, say Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, on the cover of a magazine. Then you see someone else on the cover of a magazine, and you see 4 or 5 people who dropped out of college. And it's become this refrain in Silicon Valley that college is a complete waste of time. And I happen to disagree with that in certain cases. College is not for everybody. Not everyone needs it, but it's important to realize a few things in a case like Zuckerberg. Number one, he's voluntarily dropping out of Harvard. So he's had this stamp of approval that even if he drops out of Harvard, he still gets to use the name. He's a dropout from Harvard. And that is a get out of jail free card. It's an unfair advantage. Number one. Number two, when you drop out of a school like a Harvard or a Stanford, generally speaking, you are welcome to come back and finish your degree. That is not always the case. So and people can research cognitive biases and survivorship bias. If you're going to be an investor, if you're going to be just a rational human being, it's really important to understand survivorship bias. So for instance, you don't see people who dropped out of college and had that negatively impact their lives generally on the front of magazine covers. So you have a bias because you're only seeing the survivors who have struck a home run, hit a home run.
Let me ask you this question real quick, Tim, because I think you're making some great points. But my question for you is this. If you do not know what you want to do and you're 18 or 19, do you think, taking debt into account, that it's good to just go and accrue $30,000 a year plus of debt to go get a degree in something that you are not sure is going to be your life's work? Do you think that's worth it, or do you think it's better to start working, and once you know where you want to go, then go pursue a degree in that field?
You could do both. I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all answer. I will say that for me, I don't view the objective of a liberal arts education to prepare you for a single trade. I think that the objective is to help form you into a well-rounded human being. And that might be quaint, but I will say this, because let me frame it in a different way. I get asked a lot about MBA programs and business school. And my general answer to that is, well, if you're just unsure of what to do with your life and you're looking for something to like look good on a resume that's actually a 2-year vacation, if you can afford it, fine. And it's a very high percentage of people who use it that way. If you are working at a big company and you need that on your resume to get promoted and they're going to pay for it, okay, maybe. If you are going to pay for it yourself, unless you can get into one of the top name brand MBA programs that will provide you with that golden ticket halo effect, like a Harvard or a Stanford, then I would skip it. So I think that it's sometimes a question of where you would be able to get in. But I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all answer, and there are so many examples of people who have succeeded without college that it's clearly not a prerequisite for success, however you define that. And it's just not a prerequisite. However, I think it's important to realize that the people I've met who didn't go to college or dropped out of college are just forces of nature. These people, they could have been put in almost any circumstance, and they would have scrapped and fought and found their way to their objectives. But it's clearly not a prerequisite. So this is, I don't want to get too hung up on it, but it's an endlessly fascinating topic. I think our school system is broken. I think that the amount of debt people are taking on is just
young people don't know how to manage money, right? They've never been through a class where they know how to, take on a mortgage, balance it with the revenue they're bringing in, and then balance everything else. They do not know how to manage money. So that's why, when we're talking about 19-year-olds going out and getting that liberal arts degree, if you're a force of nature, you may or may not, but if you don't know what $120,000 with compound interest on top of it is, it could be a very daunting burden that sits on your back for decades to come after school. I think that's our only concern when talking to our listeners. But school is it definitely is the safe route, I think.
Well, it provides you with a safety net. But what I would say is that my advice generally, let's say you're completely on the fence and you may opt not to go to college, or if you're just about to graduate from college. In both cases, my advice to those people who want to learn in the school, the hard knocks school of entrepreneurship, if they want to really be in the trenches and understand how deal making and negotiating gets done for high growth businesses, you should join a fast growing company that has 50 or fewer employees and do whatever necessary. You could be the janitor to have exposure to the key deal makers in that company, the people who are negotiating, trying to close sales, whatever it might be.
Like startup culture, basically.
Yeah, startup. But honestly, if you live in, I'm just making this up, but if you live in Charleston, South Carolina, on the outskirts, and you're not involved in the tech scene, and you have 10 companies around you, and the one that is the fastest growing happens to be some garbage pickup service that's run by a really good salesman, and they're 15 people strong, they're hiring 10 more people in the next quarter, and then you have other options that are maybe in sexier industries, but they're not growing as quickly, I would still opt to take the unsexy option that is growing quickly with someone who is an exceptional deal maker. I think that is a meta skill that translates to everything else afterwards. And even though, for instance, after graduation, I joined a company that imploded a year and a half later, and I was not making a ton of money considering that I was making $40,000 pre-tax in the Bay Area at a peak of a rental cycle. I was... Wow. And I was working in a fire exit on basically a K through 12 desk shoved into the corner. And the only person who made less than me was the receptionist who worked in the company of 115 people. So I was not making a lot. My equity, my ownership in the company ended up being worth zero, but I got exposed to people who are really, really good at complex sales of high price, high ticket data storage systems. And that helped me with everything else I did afterwards. So it ultimately didn't matter. That was my paid tuition. I was getting paid to learn. Not very much, but I was getting paid to learn.
Well, I was going to say, Tim, so that's really that's what John and I talk about a lot, because neither of us have traditional education. It's like more the apprentice type model. I mean, you've learned off all these amazing people in that situation, the way that you learned. Do you believe that you could have done all of this, the stuff that you've built, the books and all this, without going to college? Because I wonder that, because I know you went to a high-level school, but did any of that truly transition to what Tim Ferris is doing right now, do you think?
I think, well, there are a few things. If we dig into that, I think that there's definitely the possibility I could have done it without college. I don't think it's a prerequisite. And if you look at people who are, say, running the top long-form interview podcasts in the world, right? If you're looking at the Joe Rogans, the Mark Marons, and so on, they do not come from the same background. They come from very, very different backgrounds. And then you look at someone who's, let's say, coming out of public radio. Even they may not be coming from exactly the same background. So it's not a sole determining factor, right? Yeah. But I would, did I benefit from my education? I do think I did. I mean, keep in mind, ultimately I was in neuroscience and then East Asian studies. So at first glance, like, how would East Asian studies and Japanese, Chinese, and Korean apply to anything that I'm doing? Now, I have found some unusual ways in which they have, in the same way that if you guys are reading, say, Stoic philosophy, at first glance, it may not apply to making progress in the gym. It may not apply to building a fast-growing company, but it absolutely applies to both. And so I would say that it's certainly not a prerequisite. Do I think that it helped me in the early days? I think it probably, at the very least, gave me just a degree of confidence in the face of uncertainty that I could figure it out, but it wasn't a prerequisite at all.
So here's my question about your education at Princeton, correct? You went to Princeton?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so your gift, and this is my perception, your gift is in Tools of Titans, your new book. In the intro, you said that if you saw a picture of yourself from 7 years ago and you liked how your body looked, and this tripped me out, you would go to your 7-foot-high stack of notes and you would find out exactly what workout you were doing and exactly what you were eating in that period of time. Now, to me, right, that ability to essentially log your life is your true gift among, I'm sure, many others. Do you feel like your Princeton education perked that up, made that stronger, and essentially built you into the information machine that you are today? Or do you think you had that without it?
I had that beforehand. But it certainly, in some ways, reinforced it. I mean, I do think my experience in the sciences early on at Princeton helped me, for instance, to learn how not to fool myself when reading studies, just how to interpret things properly. But the note-taking started really early because I was born premature. I had a lot of health problems growing up. I was in the ICU. I have scars on my left side and on my wrists from whole blood transfusions, which I had 4 or 5 times. And I still have health problems to this day as a result of some of the traumatic early infant problems, like thermoregulatory issues. My left lung doesn't have full capacity. There are a number of issues. And when I started wrestling, because I was puny, I got my ass kicked really badly up until about 6th grade when I had a growth spurt, thank God. But up until that point, the only sport where I really stood a chance of developing confidence was wrestling, because it was weight class based. So the 60-pound weenie could wrestle the other 60-pound weenie and end up feeling like king of the hill, right? So when I got to a higher level in wrestling and I ended up going to nationals my senior year, the competitive advantage that I had was not endurance, because I couldn't foster that really due to my lung issues and so on, and my heat issues. I became very expert at cutting weight. I was very, very good at cutting weight. And to do it to the extent that I did, which is very unhealthy, by the way, I would never recommend it, but nonetheless, it's a big component of any weight class-based sports, powerlifting, wrestling, boxing, you name it, Olympic weightlifting. I was cutting from 178 to 152 twice a week, and then rehydrating over the span of, let's call it, 8 to 12 hours. And to do that without having organ failure, you have to develop an understanding of how your kidneys function, how your liver functions, and to understand the difference between a diuretic, what that is on a broad class, and a potassium-sparing diuretic. And you need to have a basic understanding of rehydration. And if you consume too much carbohydrate, let's say you try to do it with solely Gatorade, you're going to get so much GI distress that you'll end up further dehydrated. So maybe you use something like Pedialyte and so on and so forth. So through that advantage that I developed, I learned the benefit of writing down what I was doing so that I could identify what was working and what wasn't. And cutting weight is a great way to do that, because you can have a scale next to you and say, all right, well, hot shower, hot, say, sauna, or hot bath, which leads to the greatest number of pounds of water lost on an hourly basis? That's easy to log. That's easy to follow. And then similarly, it's like, oh, really quickly you start to realize, if I take a shower the morning of weigh-ins, I might actually absorb through the skin, say, a pound to 2 pounds of water. And in general, I lose this amount just through respiration overnight, and so on and so forth. So you develop all these different coping strategies and so on. So that's where it really began for me, and it continued focused primarily on, I would say, physical performance. I did get into cognitive performance, especially as related to language acquisition and using all sorts of odd hormones and so on that I could get my hands on, like vasopressin, to try to improve short-term memory. But it really stayed in the physical arena, the physiological arena, for a long time, and it wasn't until much later, I would say 2001, 2002, that it entered into the entrepreneurial and business arena. And then, of course, since then, I've taken these frameworks that I've accumulated over time and just tried to apply them to everything. But it began with a very, very small kid with a bad lung overheating on the wrestling mats.
I think that, Tim, that's why I was so drawn to a couple of your books, is because of the way that you frame those things up. Because, whether I was getting ready for covers or cutting for powerlifting or, squatting every day or whatever, I've always experimented on myself in the physical realm for sure too. And I just love the way, like, I would get a DEXA scan once every couple months. You were getting like weekly, like the way that on an analytical level that you did these things is what was always intriguing to me, and really what validates all the things that you're talking about. And so I learned a lot by reading the way that you did things, and I've always been my own test subject too, and always advised people to test things for themselves to see how efficient they can be, and also to calculate it, keep track of it. And I can do the same thing, not to the same degree as you, but I know in 2009 when I did this cover how I looked, I can grab my notebook and see what I ate, and I think there's a lot of value. So the fact that you do those things, I think, is massive. It's a huge takeaway. And, there's so many things in this book. One thing that John and I really wanted to hear from you, I know, was you talk about the definition between creating yourself and discovering yourself. And there's a lot of young people that are, I call it, young and old souls both here, that are trying to discover or create and figure out what they want to do for their life, or change jobs. Like, talk about those two things and kind of tell us the difference. I think there's a lot of value in that for our listeners.
Sure. This is a topic that I've thought a lot about, especially in the last few years. I wish I'd thought about it much earlier, quite frankly. But the term discover yourself, I think, is used very often to imply this sort of wandering, aimless curiosity, and there's value in that too. So I don't want to make it an either or, but there's such a focus on discovering oneself. The implication there is that I think that 20-somethings and 30-somethings are particularly prone to this, But they fantasize about going on this sort of eat, pray, love type of journey where they travel around the world and they end up in Bangladesh and then they're in Nepal and they're on top of a mountain and they see who they really are and they figure out their purpose on the planet and everything is figured out from that point forward. And it implies that you have this sort of fixed you. Like Tim Ferris, am this fixed entity and all of the secret ingredients are waiting inside me to be unlocked, and I can't seem to find them. I can't seem to visualize them properly, or whatever it is. And I think that is in some ways a healthier approach to view yourself as a constant work in progress, where you're actually starting with very little. You have certain experiences, you have your DNA, you have whatever trauma and so on that you've experienced in your life. Sure, so there are those things. You have perhaps some core strengths. But besides that, it's like, okay, you have the chassis of a car, maybe an engine. Now it's up to you to build that thing. And you are creating yourself with the decisions you make, with, in my case, the 5 people you associate with most. You are the average of the 5 people you associate with most. You are creating yourself actively through these decisions, and it's a much more proactive way to think about optimizing oneself and your experiences on the planet and your contributions to the planet, in my mind. So you have discovering yourself, and I do think that there is value in that. But I would argue that we have maybe fewer raw materials than one might expect, and that's not depressing. It's actually really uplifting, because it means the playing field is much more level than you might expect. And these decisions can be experiments. I mean, people ask me what my 5-year, 10-year plans are all the time, and I say I don't know. I have no idea, because
I can never answer that.
Yeah, it's like I know what I think it's important to think very hard on your values and morally what you will do or not do, what you'll accept or not accept. But beyond that, my life is a series of 2-week experiments, 6-month to 12-month projects, and I do my damnedest to do a great job and put out something fantastic during that period of time. And then I wait to see which doors open or present themselves. Right. Because if you have, say, and some people do this and they're incredibly good at it. So once again, and this should be reaffirming for people, there's no one way to figure it out. But for me, if I try to have a 5-year plan that is reliable, well, to make it reliable, if you step up to bat, you can't swing for the fences every time. You have to bunt sometimes, and you have to run singles. I don't like to live that way. I don't want to have a reliable 5-year plan, because I aim at 80%.
Because, Tim, honestly, isn't there no such thing in your mind? Isn't there honestly no such thing as a 5-year plan in life? I always say you got to be at peace with the unknown, because life is the definition of the unknown. Do you really think somebody could see through a 5-year plan in this world?
I think not with 100% certainty, for sure. But the way that you would have to make it more likely that you could stick to a 5-year plan is you aim at like 50% of your capacity. And that's it. You play it super safe. You don't push out to the edges. You don't push to the extremes. You don't push yourself to the breaking point. You say, no, I'm going to stay at 40 miles an hour and a 60, and that's how I'm going to play this game, and I just don't want to do that. And oftentimes, like you said, uncertainty can swing in both directions. It can bring fortune to you. It can take things away from you. And when you start a project, it's very often impossible, or it is impossible, to foresee where it will lead you if you do an exceptional job. You just can't even fathom the people who might come out of the woodwork, the opportunities that might present themselves, or the person you might bump into at Starbucks. You have no idea. So I am always looking at my life in terms of 2-week experiments and 6-month projects. And the reason I brought that up is that if you're creating yourself instead of just discovering yourself, you don't have to make all of these permanent, lifelong decisions. Just like, okay, let me just ask a question of myself, like, what if I did the opposite for a week? Okay, instead of doing all of this pushing, like to build up my chesticles 24/7, like, okay, why don't I focus on deadlifting for 2 weeks and see what happens? Okay, it's not a lifelong decision. You're not going to become, you're not going to be going up against Konstantinovs anytime soon. But chill out. It's a 2-week experiment. Do some deadlifts.
But Tim, what do you think the value of this is? You know, you mentioned the eat, pray, love, spectacle that many young people think discovering yourself is. But don't you think there's immense value, and you may refer to it as, another word, but I guess looking at yourself introspectively and say, why, for example, why am I quickly defensive? Why do I not listen to people? And just breaking down, like you said, trauma you maybe had earlier in your life. Just breaking down yourself to figure out how you can better yourself, because I think that can be done at the same time as, let's say, you're trying to create, I don't want to say the new you, but what you're going to be. Don't you think there's value in digging into yourself and figuring out why you do what you do?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and I would view that as part of your creating yourself. So if you think of yourself as, let's just say, a piece of software, which you are, right? I mean, you have hardware, and then you have your software. You've got your body, you've got your brain, and then you have your programming. And part of creating yourself is, as you improve your versions, taking care of the bugs in the software. So for me, the form that takes very often, and this is a pattern that came up repeatedly in Tools of Titans. Some really top screenwriters, a number of top creatives all did this, and it's called morning pages. Morning pages, it's borrowed from Julia Cameron, who wrote a book called The Artist's Way, and it's 3 pages of longhand writing, stream of consciousness every morning. That's it. And Brian Koppelman, who's, for instance, he did Rounders, he's done dozens of films, Billions, which is a show on Showtime right now, a hit show he co-created. He's recommended morning pages to maybe 100 folks. 10 of them probably actually did it for a consistent period of time. And I want to say 9 of them had multiple hit books, TV shows, and films. I mean, the hit rate was just astonishing. Ooh. And this allows me, the purpose of my morning pages is really primarily twofold for me. And Julia Cameron calls them spiritual windshield wipers, which I think is kind of a cool way to put it. The goal is to take those weird anxieties and self-defeating thoughts, anger, and so on, and trap them on the page so that they don't control your thoughts for the rest of the day. That's point number 1 for me. And when you start to express these thoughts on paper, so very often my morning pages are just 3 pages of bitching and moaning, and that's okay. But when you put it on paper, what are you doing? It's very difficult to try to analyze and post-game analysis your own thoughts if it's not frozen somewhere. When you put it down on paper, you notice a few things. Number 1, you can actually improve your thinking by going over it and realizing that, oh my God, like most of the time this makes no sense whatsoever. And then you can dig into it and say, where is this story coming from? So I'm telling myself this story. And the story might be, I'm impatient. The story might be, my uncle, my mom, my dad, my brother always does this, and therefore it's his fault that I respond this way. What are these narratives that are controlling your life, these beliefs that you think are yours that might not be yours at all? You just absorb them because you're in a household perhaps, or a school, or a playground, or a team where everybody else had this belief. It's not your belief. You just absorbed it. And so I think more morning journaling, there's another form called the 5-minute journal that I think is very helpful but very different. But morning pages, I think, is an extremely helpful tool. And I have my morning pages. I'm in a hotel in New York. I travel with my morning pages all the time. I have them up in my hotel room. So that would be an example of creating yourself and debugging your software in exactly the way that you, I think, described, which is trying to identify why you're caught in these thought loops and these patterns, and freezing them up.
Right, they're not even real, right? I mean, they're not real. We create our own bubbles, and we trap ourselves in them, Yeah. But we eventually have to figure out how to escape.
Yeah, exactly. And you work on it. It's just like anything else. It's like, for instance, right now, it's like I know I'm basically bone on bone in my left ankle. It's like, all right, well, I have a really problematic Achilles tendon on that side. It's like, okay, work on it. It's like you can ignore it. You can just develop some compensation, and things will get worse. That'll start to affect your hip, and then it'll affect your knee. And instead, it's like, all right, well, let's try to figure it out. And that could be PRP. It could be working on my range of motion with gymnastic strength training. It could be all sorts of stuff. Or it could be anger. Like I've had, if I could point to a helpful / harmful reaction that has been knee-jerk for me since as long as I can, since I can remember, this sort of aggression, impatience, anger has been a piece of it. And I honestly think it could be partially hardwired, like I'm the Rottweiler of dog breeds than the Labrador, perhaps. But then, on the other hand, the way that I got bullies to stop bullying me as a tiny kid was to go completely batshit crazy. Like, I had to overreact so tremendously to disincentivize them from screwing with me. They would just choose another wimp in the class to pick on. That I think that became a coping mechanism that has just traveled with me, and that no longer serves me. Right? We all have physical, emotional, psychological habits and loops that no longer serve us. At a point in time, they did. At a point in time, they had to, because that's an adaptation. But for me, I realized at one point, I'm like, okay, I've always joked that this impatience is a real asset, and I do think it is up to a point. But things in excess tend to become their opposite, right? Freedom fighters become tyrants. Belongings become hindrances. They're like an anchor thrown overboard in a boat, and so on and so forth. So it's like, to a degree, yes, helpful. To an extreme, no. Totally paralyzing. You're just caught, and you can't level up. So these are the kind of things that I think about.
Tim, back to the morning stuff. So you talk about the morning pages. You know, when you and I met at Arnold's place, we talked a lot about morning routines. You had a few questions for me, because I'm kind of always speaking that to all of our listeners and the people that followed me for years. And I believe that, like, my daily strategy, morning routine, has been so locked in for so many years. It's compounded over time to give me some success in my field, and I think it continually will. Tell me about, did you just run into that a lot, meeting all these people? Did they have set morning non-negotiables that were just eerily similar, or what was your experience in dealing with all these great people?
Yeah, my experience in dealing with all these great people, whether it's Schwarzenegger or Jamie Foxx or Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL commander, or anyone really in this group,
Jocko's a boss.
Jocko is a boss. People should look up Jocko for a photo. He will terrify you off the internet, perhaps.
Yeah.
His Twitter Q&As are the most hilarious thing ever, by the way. They're all like 1 or 2 words.
So good.
One of my favorites was, weighted pull-ups or unweighted pull-ups? Response, yes.
Yeah, that's about right.
In any case, the importance is not that you follow someone's specific routine. The important piece is that you have a routine. And it could be starting at 11 a.m. It could be like Jocko starting at 4:30 in the morning. But when you have a routine, a morning routine, it's like a boot up sequence. In other words, you don't want to wake up and have to use your decision-making hit points, your limited number of calories that you can allocate to creative action, to deciding what to eat, to decide which toothpaste to use, to decide when to wake up, to decide all these trivial things that really matter, but they should be automatic. So all of these people have routines, and I'll tell you, for instance, just after all of my exposure, what some of mine are. And I have very set routines for the first, say, 60 to 90 minutes of each day, and I have very set routines for the last 60 minutes of each day. In the morning, and these are borrowed from various people, I make my bed, which is something I never did, ever, until a few years ago. Met a monk named Dandapani, long story, and I also was exposed to a commencement speech by McCraven, famed former Navy commander, and both of them convinced me of the value of making your bed in the morning. And it's something very small that has an oddly disproportionate sort of psychological benefit, but I'll keep it at that. And we're not talking 4 seasons here. Like, I'm not taking 30 minutes on it. I basically have a really big blanket, and I'm not tucking in the sheets. I'm just covering up the sheets, arranging the pillows so they're somewhat symmetrical, and that's it. So in an uncertain world where things can throw your day completely sideways, you have at least one thing you've accomplished in the beginning that you come back to last. That bookending is important. But like, if it's good enough for McCraven, like, look up McCraven, folks. Like, if it's good enough for him and it's good enough for a guy who sat in the mountains for 20 years, I'm like, okay, that's probably good enough for Tim Ferris. So that's number one. Immediately after that, and my phone is on airplane mode this entire time. So I do not have any inbound texts, emails, or anything. No input whatsoever.
Right.
I go from that to upstairs, and I sit down on a couch, and I will sometimes, depending on how my dog is, take my dog for a quick walk, but then I will sit down and meditate for 20 minutes. And I practice generally something called transcendental meditation, which Arnold also did for a year, that gave him decades of benefit, which was wild to me to hear. But I will also sometimes listen to guided meditations. For instance, there's a very good one which sounds cheesy, but I noticed a lot of cheesy stuff actually works. It's called the 2010 Smile Meditation, recorded by a woman named Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H. And there's another woman I interviewed named Maria Popova, who's just a machine. She's an incredible writer who digests and puts out more information than I think is humanly possible. She runs a site called Brain Pickings, which started off as an email newsletter to 5 friends or something, and now it has 7 to 10 million uniques a month. It's just incredible. She listens to this every morning and credits it with changing her life. So I'll sometimes listen to that. Then I get up and I flip on a Breville tea kettle, which you can set at specific degrees depending on the type of tea you're having. And I will then make generally titanium tea. That's kind of a joke. Tongue-in-cheek reference to this tea that I make, which is Pu-Erh tea, which is a black tea, Pu-ERH, plus a little bit of green tea, because they have different pharmacokinetic profiles, so just absorb differently by the body, and a little bit of turmeric and ginger. And I believe it is a Red Blossom glass tea strainer. You can get them on Amazon. They're very, very cheap. They have different models, of course. And I will steep that for very, very short, maybe a minute first, even less, 30 seconds is fine. Pour my cup of tea, and then I will add any number of things. It could be MCT oil, like a caprylic acid. Mm-hmm. It could be butter as well, or it could just be coconut oil. But I'm adding some type of fat to my tea. I will sit down with that tea, and I will either do morning pages, or I'll do something called the 5-minute journal. The 5-minute journal is 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, and it's basically pregame, postgame. And pregame is I am grateful for ... then affirmations I am for this day ... and there are a handful of things like that. You're filling out perhaps 3 or 4 short lists, and then in the PM before you go to bed or after dinner, you have 3 awesome things that happened today, 3 things that I could have done to make it better, and then there are a few other things. So I will do this journaling, and then from that point, I will move on with my day. But that's sort of my set boot up sequence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's important. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, the one thing that's interesting to me, and this is probably my favorite quote, Tim, from Tools of Titans. Cory brought up, what do all these great people do? What are the habits? And then I read a quote in the intro area under just remember 2 principles, and you say, the superheroes you have in your mind are nearly all walking flaws who've maximized 1 or 2 strengths. And that just nailed me right in the face, because Cory and I did a podcast, our 23rd podcast on number 23, Michael Jordan, right? And we talked about greatness and the level he took it to. And I just thought about these enormous people who are amazing, and that's why we love them in the public eye. But they are, just like everyone else, so flawed, but they're not perceived that way because of their outstanding one attribute that we all love. Like, how did you develop that, and did you see that in real time for yourself when you're dealing with some of these people?
Oh, I saw it with almost all of them. And there are a handful of mutants who honestly just seem like aliens.
Mutants.
But just like, they don't need sleep, they don't need food, they run 100 miles a day. I'm just like, okay, you're just a different species. I need to figure out common ground somewhere else. But when you really dig, and particularly since I've become friends with almost everybody that I've had on the podcast, when you really get to know them, all of these people have insecurities. All of them are fighting battles that no one knows about. And some of these battles are years or decades long. And I remember having a conversation with Rainn Wilson from, best known as Dwight from The Office, but who's a very successful actor in TV and film. And he said something to me that really struck me, and I've actually borrowed it a lot when I'm speaking publicly. I try to use this phrase because I think it's so powerful. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said along the lines of, there are things I need to do just to get to normal. He said, I'm not talking about extreme performance. I'm not talking about getting to super elite. I'm talking about getting to a point where I can function like a normal human being and not be stuck in my head and self-flagellating all day long. And those include meditation. Those include tennis. Those include some improv acting, just to get to normal. I mean, that's his phrasing, right? And this is somebody many people we put on a pedestal. And what I've realized is that a very high percentage of these folks, whether it's Arnold Schwarzenegger or Robert Rodriguez, who's a really impressive polymath, director, writer, musician, and many, Amelia Boone would be another 3-time World's Toughest Mudder champion and full-time attorney at Apple. She's just a machine. That most of these folks have figured out how to do two things. They figured out how to stop pretending to be someone else. So they figured out how to be themselves and get away with it and design their lives in that way. And number two is they figured out how to leverage their strengths instead of trying to fix every little weakness. Because if you're in a big ship, let's just say you've built a big ship, a sailboat, and you have a tiny needle-width hole in the boat, you don't have to jump on that right away. It's not going to sink the boat, right? But if you're dead in the water and you're not traveling anywhere, well, yeah, you're probably going to run out of water and food and die at some point. So you want to keep the boat moving forward, and those are your strengths, right? If your ultimate objective is this voyage with grand aspirations and you need to get to your objective, you want to focus on direction and you want to focus on speed. Those are your strengths. And these tiny little panty pinches along the way, and I should distinguish between, I would say, non-fatal weaknesses and flaws and fatal flaws and weaknesses, right? There's some that'll just capsize the whole thing. For instance, if you just cannot manage to work productively with anyone else, that is probably something you need to fix. It's going to be very difficult to accomplish what you want to accomplish in life and to put the positive dent in the universe that you want to accomplish without the collaboration of other people. But the 200 plus people that I interviewed almost all figured out how to be themselves, how to maximize their strengths, and in some cases, and in actually quite a few cases, turn weaknesses into strengths. Like Arnold with his accent, right? And I recall at one point I was chatting with Ariana Huffington, and she was trying to get rid of her accent. She has a very pronounced Greek accent. And she met Henry Kissinger at one point. And Henry Kissinger said, no, you have to stop that. You want to keep your accent. So that's what makes you different. And this is a power that you need to preserve. He's like, no, you should not fix your accent. Like, who can imagine Arnold without his accent?
Oh,
and even Cameron, who directed Terminator, said, if we in effect, we wouldn't have been able to create the Terminator without Arnold, because only Arnold sounds like a robot.
And one-liners would be near as cool, right? I mean, it's so good.
No, it's exactly true, and it just takes some time to figure it out. And there are cases, for instance, like Dan Carlin, I interviewed, who runs my favorite podcast, which is Hardcore History. And he puts out an episode every 3 to 6 months. I mean, they're just incredible. And he used to be on radio, and he was constantly told that he should change his voice and how he spoke, because he would send it into the red line, and then he'd whisper. He was really quiet, and then he'd shout, and the audio guys would bitch and moan about it. And later, a few years later, he just stuck with it, and people started asking it. He would have his intro guy turn his strength into a trademark, or his weakness into a trademark, basically, where he's like, okay, the person introing me, all right, up next we have Dan Carlin. He yells, he whispers. He's coming right at you, and Dan. And it became this very distinguishing characteristic.
Like his brand. Yeah.
Exactly. So this, what Dan has told me, and it's in Tools of Titans also, is copyright your faults. Copyright your faults.
Yeah.
And he turned it into his trademark style. And now anyone who tries to imitate it is imitating Dan Carlin. So there are true weaknesses that are handicapping you, and then there are things that you perceive as weaknesses. And sometimes, surprisingly often, you can twist those into a benefit. And another habit across all these people is they ask absurd questions. So they'll ask, like Peter Thiel, serial billionaire, he'll ask questions like, why can't you accomplish your 10-year plan in the next 6 months? And he will wait for an answer. He wants you to think about it. Or
it forces thought. It like purges thought out of you. That's brilliant.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Or Peter Diamandis, chairman of the X Prize. When someone wants investment from him, he'll ask them, how could you 10x the economics of your business in, say, the next 3 months? And if they say that's impossible, he responds with, I don't accept that answer. Try again. And so I like to journal on these types of questions. For instance, when I was writing this book, I would ask questions like, what would this look like if it were easy? Or if I had to write this book in a week, what might I do? And I wasn't intending to try to do that, but I wanted to break my thought patterns by asking an absurd question and then journaling on it. And similarly, you could sit down, and journaling is just such a powerful tool because you're locking your thought on paper. And if you were to ask, what weaknesses do I have, and how might I turn them into strengths, or how might I convert them into strengths? Not by changing them, but by maybe putting them in a different context, maybe finding someone else who complements one of your weaknesses, whatever it is. But so you could make a list of all your weaknesses and say, how have these been strengths? And how can I minimize the damage? Whatever. But like, how could these strengths be turned into, or weaknesses be turned into strengths? And I just love these questions, and it's important to realize that you can get anything you want by studying other people and emulating them. Someone else, probably many people, have done whatever in your mind you are considering doing, or something equivalent, right? So there are blueprints and recipes out there. One of the ways that you unearth those is by asking questions, right? If you're going to go digging in other people's heads for the gold, you have to use these pickaxes that are called questions. So many people in this book just ask different questions. And the good news is they're all in there. I wrote a chapter on 17 questions that have changed my life. It helped me to test the impossible, so to speak. And literally, these are locked and loaded. You can just take those and journal them. They're sort of action ready, so to speak. Road ready, and you find a lot of flexibility in that. But then you have all these crazy tactics and gadgets and stuff, right? So another consistent pattern was how people prioritize sleep. These top performers, a lot of, say, B players, or even me when I was younger, I was always trying to cut back on sleep. It's like, let me just figure out how to optimize so I can sleep less. And I did it. But there was, I think, a cost to be paid. And most of the people in this book use tools like, say, the Chili Pad, or they'll have specific cocktails. So the Chili Pad allows you to cool your sheet. It's basically a separate sheet that you put under your side of the bed, and you circulate water through it at a precise temperature that you can specify between 55 and, say, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And it is just a game changer for many people. It was recommended to me by Rick Rubin, who's probably the most legendary music producer of the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And then you have other stuff that I can't explain why it works, and yet it does. The Chili Pad I can explain. But there's other stuff, like Dr. Seth Roberts, may he rest in peace. He passed away not too long ago. But he, from Berkeley, he identified this pre-bed cocktail. Super simple. Hot water, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. I tend to use Bragg's, but you could use probably anything. And then 1 tablespoon of raw honey. And you mix this up. I've had insomnia for my entire life. I'm much better now. You drink this stuff. I had at least 10 friends, because type A personalities are very often insomniacs. It just goes with the territory. I had 10 of my close friends who they texted me after they tried this, and they were just like, dude, I don't know why this works, but holy shit, like out like a light, best sleep of my life kind of reports. So simple, so cheap, and there are dozens of different things you can try, but those are two off the bat. One a little more expensive, the chili pads, a few $100s I think, and then the cocktail, which is close to cheap. Close to zero for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. Do you think that while you were interviewing these people, there's just a couple last questions, Tim. I know you got to run. Did these people voluntarily offer the information about sacrifice and struggle to get to this level, or is that thing or the suffering that they went through to be great? Did you ask any of those type of questions? Because I feel like everybody has that story, and most people will share it just willingly. And so, did you find that as a constant variable also? I was interested. To know that.
Yeah. I mean, all of these folks have suffered extended rejection, have suffered trials and tribulations, and a very high percentage, and this sometimes goes hand in hand with the entrepreneurial roller coaster, have suffered some form of depression or manic depression with extended dark periods. So I will very proactively ask people about their darkest periods. Could you describe one of your darkest periods and how you pulled yourself out of it or came out of it? Because I think it's important to explore.
That's our deepest truth. Don't you think if you actually get somebody to expose that and open up, like you're communicating with another human on like the deepest level possible?
I think that getting out of the darkness is perhaps the most important topic to discuss, because I remember as one of my bosses told me way back in the day when I had bosses.
Been a minute.
He was the VP of sales, an incredible salesman, had run big sales organizations, and he was trying to help me. I came in for my first meeting with him, and I was over-prepared. I had all of these details, and I sat down to give him like the 10 minutes on each account, and he said, "Tim, not to interrupt, but I don't need this story." He's like, "What are next steps?" And he said, "Also, I don't need the good news because the good news takes care of itself. Just tell me the problems." And the good things tend to take care of themselves, right? So it's really the darkness that is worth addressing because it's under-discussed, I think. So I agree. I think that is a very humanizing topic, and it's an all-important topic because...
Yeah, and I just got to congratulate you, man, on your courage, because like I personally, I've battled drug addiction, I've overdosed, and it took me, it was very difficult for me to put it out there publicly, and your courage to put out your struggle with suicide, especially with the profile of individual you are, just a lot of respect for that. And that's something that I don't know if we want to prod on, but is there anything you want to say to people? Because the reason I talk about it is because I want to save people, because I know a lot of people struggle with painkiller addiction, just like a lot of people struggle with suicide and suicidal thoughts. So is there anything you want to say to people out there who are going through what you went through?
There's a lot that I'd like to say, but I'll keep it somewhat short. So the first thing I'll say is that the chapter name is Some Practical Thoughts on Suicide. A version of that can be found online. It was slightly tweaked and updated for the book. I think it's the most important thing I've ever written. So if you're having really dark thoughts, then I would encourage you to just Google Tim Ferris suicide or practical thoughts on suicide, and it'll come right up. There are a few things. Definitely, if you're really in an acute phase, there are resources that I didn't know of at the time. And just as context, I almost killed myself in college. A lot of my best friends killed themselves in high school, college, and after college. So this is a subject that I felt like a coward for not exploring earlier, but it was much like you. It was very difficult for me to talk about this. I mean, there are some secrets we keep from people for fear of embarrassing ourselves, but then there are the really dark secrets, and this was one of them for me. But I would say, A, you're not alone. B, everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about. C, if you're listening to this podcast, or you're reading the blog post, or you're reading Tools of Titans, and you're reading one of these chapters, and there are a few chapters about this type of darkness and how to deal with it, you are in a group, in a tribe of probably thousands of people who are listening to this exact podcast right now who are facing the same battle. And I think where it gets very dangerous is when people feel alone and they feel like they are uniquely flawed. No, everybody's flawed.
Right.
And this is not an uncommon problem, but it is a serious one. And you need to develop habits and routines and relationships that can act as a safety net to help you rebound so that the downs aren't quite as low and quite as long. And you can do that. That is a learnable skill. It's something that I've spent a lot of time and energy to work on. And I would just implore them, but it doesn't matter if you get the book. I mean, of course, I'm very proud of the book and I would love people to read it, but it's more important that people get this message if they need the help or the tools. So some practical thoughts on suicide is I've made available on the blog as well. So if you search for that, then you can read it. And I think it's the most important thing I've written.
I gotta tell you, Tim, that I gotta say, I think it just allows people to know that you're a machine, dude. I mean, I feel like I'm some sort of machine. John's a machine. But anytime you can take it to the human level so people can identify, and so many people have battled this, so many people have battled things that John and things that I've had, like, it's just, they have to be talked about. So I got to commend you, man. It makes everybody probably feel just a different kind of way about you. That's the only way I can really, like, have the thought process, just because it makes you more human, because everything you do is so analytically computerized and just so, like, at a gangster level. Like, man, that guy went through that and now he's trying to help me. Like, I mean, dude, it's awesome, bro. It really is.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. And it's these, and I also want it to be more talked about, in the sense that keeping it all inside it's a natural instinct, but I think it's just like pouring acid down your throat and keeping it inside your body. It's very corrosive. And for that reason, I just felt a real moral obligation to come out and talk about it. And it's been so liberating, I have to tell you. I was so fearful of how my family would respond, because my family didn't really know about any of this. And I was so fearful about how they would respond, how some of my friends would respond, and it was nothing but positive. And of course there's some idiots on the internet that are going to just because they can't help themselves, but that's their own punishment. So I try not to worry too much about it. But the response was so overwhelmingly positive that it was really liberating. And I realized how carrying that secret around, how much of a toll and how heavy that had been, how much of a burden that had been. So it was it's been a great experience. And if I can help, I mean, if you look at the comments in that blog post, because of the number of people who read the blog, it's about 3 million uniques a month now.
Nice.
The likelihood of that finding someone who is about to kill themselves is pretty high. And you'll see in the comments multiple people who are like, I had a gun locked and loaded in my drawer and I was going to shoot myself this weekend, and I just decided that due to these things, it was not the right decision. And
well, I mean, think how amazing that is, Tim. It's like, you're a successful guy, you're a brilliant guy, you've done many things, but when you think about a post and you opening up on personal experience and that saving lives, I mean, I don't know your value system inside and out, but I gotta imagine there is nothing more valuable.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that it's terrifying to me to think what would have happened and what wouldn't have happened had I killed myself in college. I mean, it really seemed like there was no way out. And all of these little things combined to lead me into this downward spiral. And in retrospect, it's just ridiculous. But to the person experiencing it, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I still have to manage depressive tendencies. It's not like I came out of the storm and I'm in the clear forever. But I've realized more so that there are tools and relationships there. You can build your dams before you need them. That's the important part. And that, in fact, if you want the luscious green of life, and we all do, then you you should plan for the changing of the seasons. You will have to deal with the rain. You will have to deal with the gray. And that's okay. And if you look at many of the people we would put on a pedestal, many of the people we idolize, they fought these same battles. So for me, in any case, it's been very important to talk about not just the good days, right? I have an entire chapter in Tools of Titans dedicated to what my bad days look like and why or how I'm able to plan and execute so that even if I get nothing done for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, net, I'm able to seemingly and actually get a lot done because I've structured my life in a certain way and I use certain decision-making frameworks and so on. But I want people to see the days where I lay in bed until 2 in the afternoon because I just don't want to face the day. Like, I want people to be aware of that. And it seems like a depressing topic, but at the end, it ends up being a very reassuring discussion because we're all fucked up.
Yeah. Amen to that.
You know what I mean? And it's like you can do all the things you want to do. You can have the success that you envision for yourself and the wonderful relationships that you want, despite the fact that you're fucked up. You can actually learn to dance with that. And that is obvious because everyone is in the same boat when it comes to that. So the good news is you can pick and choose these little experiments, these little 2-week experiments. You can keep track, and you can figure out what your customized toolkit looks like. And that's really what drove me to publish this book. I mean, after the 4-Hour Chef, I thought I was done with books. I was like, I'm done. Books are too hard. I don't want to do it again. And I started putting together Tools of Titans just for me. It was the notebook to end all notebooks. I put it together for my own use. I wanted the cheat sheet. And I should also say that only about 60% of the book is from the podcast. The rest of it's all new stuff from the guests and from me. I wanted to put together this just SEAL Team 6 cheat sheet for world-class performance in any area. And then I got to I was putting it together for myself, and I was like, okay, this is getting long.
Yeah. What I love about the book, man, is at the beginning, how you literally instruct the reader. I think it's very inquisitive and interesting. Here's how you can read it. If you're not interested in this topic, move on. But then stop and pay attention to what you're not interested in, because that may tell you something about yourself, the things that you gloss over. And if they're habitual, well, maybe you do need to look at that. I mean, I think it's such a great intro, and it just guides people on this book that honestly is fantastic. And it's so full of information, but it almost, you encourage people to read it the way they want to read it. And that's what I did. I followed your directions, and the experience was awesome. It's a fantastic book. It's a huge achievement, and I enjoyed it. I think everybody needs to get it.
I got to tell you, Tim, that's part of what's great about you as an author is the practical application, which I mentioned before. So I read through it this morning. I used the QL activation from Donnie Thompson that you talk about in the book because I've got a QL problem from deadlifting 600 pounds that's triggered out. I put something in the application literally 20 minutes after I thumbed through it this morning. And that right there is like when somebody can put any of these number of things into their lives, like pretty much right there. I don't know why on earth they wouldn't purchase the book or, read through the blog. You're just putting out real stuff that can help.
Go back to it, right? That's what I love about
absolutely.
You can go back to this thing over and over because it's a massive amount of information. And this point in your life may require this chapter, right? Maybe 2 years later you pull it off the shelf. There's so much value in it. It's just a really, really big achievement.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's broken into healthy, wealthy, and wise to make it a little easier to pick and choose from. And if somebody finds just 2 profiles that they really love, I'm happy. That's mission accomplished for me. And that's probably 30 pages, right? And it's also, I put it together so that it would be relevant 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. Almost everything in here is still going to be relevant and still going to be immediately applicable. So, I mentioned this before we got going, but this is the first book that I've actually enjoyed writing. So I think that bodes well for the experience of the readers, and I'm really stoked to have it released into the wild.
So, okay, let's wrap it up with that, Tim. Where and when and how can they get a hold of this thing? I mean, this will air in about 48 hours, so we want to make sure they can grab it, they can buy it, they can support you, buddy.
Oh yeah, by the time this comes out, it'll be shipping and it'll be everywhere. You can see sample chapters at toolsoftitans.com, including the foreword that was written by the big man, Arnold himself,
our
which
homie.
is still surreal and crazy to me. And
what a guy, Tim?
Yeah, amazing. And the introduction that we've talked about quite a bit, the how to use this book, is also up there, and it's available anywhere you can find books. So, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Independence. It should be anywhere you can possibly find books. That's the intention and hope.
Yeah, that's when you know you're a boss, John, when that's the answer. Where can you find the book?
We're trying to get there. We're trying.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Tim,
lastly, it's a work in progress. It always is. Me too.
Absolutely. Lastly, I'm going to tell a quick story that the way I met Tim, we were at a poker tournament at Arnold's house, and we had the same strategy. I'm going to tell the story real quick. We had the same strategy that we both heard, that the person who gets last, not first, well, the first person got a prize too, but the person who gets last in the poker tournament gets like a $5,000 Tag Heuer watch. And so I was sitting next to Annie Duke, who's a World Series poker champion, and Tim was on the other side of the room. We had met briefly, talked about the squat every day stuff, and then, kind of went to play. And so my goal was to bait Annie Duke in to go all in the first hand, which I didn't know I could do because I really don't know how to play poker. But I got her to do it. And so she goes all in, and I'm either epically going to beat Annie Duke and somehow pull rabbit on my hat, or I'm going to go out first and win this watch and go smoke cigars with Arnold, which was my plan. Well, I think Tim had the same plan, but I think he went out on the second hand. I didn't see the table, but it was literally like a few minutes later, and then he was like, damn, you beat me to the punch, because I had the same plan. So I'm still wearing that watch proud, Tim. I just got to tell you.
Well, you know what's so funny about that? So I was at this table, and people, at least a few of them, knew me as like the 4-hour guy, and trying to figure stuff out and find the lateral approach. So I went all in, and I was like, guys, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I really just want to get the watch. I was super direct about it, and I pushed it in, and they were like, no, it's some sophisticated plan. Like, he's figured out how to do A, B, and C, and so people wouldn't do it. And I was like, damn it. I actually don't have a plan other than trying to commit suicide on this table right now, and they wouldn't help me do it. So I ended up being second out, which is no good. So I did get to smoke the cigars though, so I was happy that I got the cigars, and no watch, but hey, to the winner / first loser go the spoils, and so it goes.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I know I appreciate your time, John. You got anything else?
Yeah. No, just thank you so much, Tim. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to read the book, and I know I'm gonna call on it for direction further in my life. So the book is fantastic. Congratulations, and thank you so much for coming on Business and Biceps.
My pleasure, guys. I had a great time, and keep up the good work. Thanks so much.
Well, John, I just learned so much from Tim Ferris. I got a question for you.
Shoot, buddy.
John, are you ready? John,
yeah, dude, there's so much. What?
Can the podcast be stopped, John?
Cheater! The podcast can't be stopped!